First of all, do we agree that this was not an intentional shoot down of this airline? Does everyone agree with that? I mean, nobody said, let's shoot down a commercial airline. With that said, there are, not counting the victims of this airline, did we say there was 800 people who have been killed since February?
According to the New York Times of yesterday, they gave a figure of 800 since April.
Okay, is that a figure about right with the rest of you?
Probably more like 1,000.
Probably more.
And I've seen
now, of
figures.
those who are dead, how many are civilians from the eastern part of Ukraine who have been killed by the military operations by the Ukrainian government in that region? Of the dead, of the 800 dead, we're talking about half of them, or the vast majority of them?
Mr. Chairman, it's very difficult, you know, in the conditions of the urban warfare, it's very difficult to establish which side killed how many people, and the propaganda efforts on both sides are tremendous.
So, would you agree with that, Mr. Silva?
So, yeah.
That it's hard to tell?
Absolutely, yes.
It seems to me that it wouldn't be that hard to tell. It seems to me that if you have dead civilians on the ground in eastern Ukraine, that you would have to assume that they were not being shot intentionally by the separatists who were there as part of their community. That would seem to be that way.
Mr. Chairman, it's hard to tell. We don't know. But what we do know is that we have recently seen that there have been that the separatists have killed civilians and put them in a grave, in a mass grave. We found this over the last couple of days. So
the separatists killed the civilians.
Yes, sir.
For what reason did they do that?
We don't know, sir. What we know is there are some dead people.
Has there been any ceasefires in this between the separatists and the Ukrainian army? There have been?
There have been
How many ceasefires have there been?
There were several, but the latest one, if you remember, Mr. Chairman, the latest one was the latest one is, of course, because of MH17. It was a unilateral ceasefire, but the one before ended when the separatists attacked the Donetsk airport. It was a unilateral ceasefire by Ukraine, and it was broken by the separatists. Okay,
so there have been ceasefires that. Do we know? Do you agree with that, Dr. Sylvia? There were ceasefires. How many ceasefires do we know of there?
Well, the main one was one Dr. Aaron was referring to, which was June 20th to June 30th. So it was a 10-day ceasefire that then ended in renewed fighting.
Okay. Have there been other ceasefires?
Brief ones. Again, as Dr. Aaron was with after the immediate shoot down of the airplane, there was a brief,
Okay.
So there's not been a prolonged ceasefire coupled with serious negotiations.
I think your point that we have been calling for ceasefires in Palestine, Israeli ceasefires, but we don't seem to be putting that type of energy into calling for ceasefires and negotiations in Ukraine. Is this issue one of where people are demanding federalism, and there's not a negotiation on this issue, or is this just a matter of the people are just demanding that they have a separate status, totally separate status, and become independent of Ukraine? Was there the people who are actually fighting? What demand have they made?
Sir, I guess my impression is that while there's generally always a demand for more autonomy from regions,
yes,
this conflict wasn't created by Ukrainians seeking greater autonomy. It was created by Russian operatives who were sent into eastern Ukraine and seized buildings and violently closed off the region.
So the people who were seizing buildings, the first buildings that were seized that I remember in Ukraine were seized by the people who were trying to force the democratically elected president out of his office, seizing buildings in the eastern part, or excuse me, in the western part of Ukraine. And those, I'm sure those were local people, although there's been suggestions that they were very radical. And so buildings were seized there. I'm not, I will have to say that, do you agree, Doctor, with that analysis that the people who were basically starting this and seizing those buildings originally were all Russian agents and not local people?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I may go a bit far. You know, I mean, it certainly is true what you say, that, that a lot of this originated last winter when you had the efforts to overthrow what you correctly say was the democratically elected government of Ukraine, a government which faced elections in what I guess was February of 2015, which would have given the opposition, in other words, if the opposition in Ukraine was upset with what Yanukovych did about the European Association Agreement, they had a whole year to organize, to deal with the matter at the ballot box. After all, the Maidan movement, which I was hugely sympathetic to, myself personally, was all about European values. Well, what are European Western values but free elections? Elections were coming. Unfortunately, it didn't go that way, and those elections could have been monitored by Western monitors to see if there's any kind of vote fraud had they occurred. We saw what happened in 2004 during the Orange Revolution when there was a vote fraud, and our Western monitors found it and they brought it to light. That could have happened again. You could have had a democratic process taking place, and these issues dealt with that way. Instead, but to get to your point, instead, yes, there was a violent solution was opted for. And I was in the Maidan in February, saw young guys running around town with spears and pikes and sharpened metallic objects. There were huge military tents in the Maidan with crates after crate of Molotov cocktail mix. What were these guys doing with that stuff? Where did they get it? And in any case, so you had the violent overthrow of the government, and then the uprisings in the West. Lvov, declared itself a party of regions free zone and that kind of thing. This was all seen as hugely provocative in the East.
The most important thing that you're bringing out is that the violence that we're talking about did not start with the separatists taking over a building in the eastern part of Ukraine.
Right.
Although that was a violent act, and the military coming in to then make sure that those buildings were not occupied, but instead were under the sovereignty of the Kiev government, created more violence. There's one other question I had, specifically the question that was posed, and I believe by one of the other panelists, was that if indeed Yanukovych would have signed this agreement with Russia rather than the European agreement, which was offered, which he didn't feel was as good an agreement, could the Ukrainian people in the next election cycle, which would have been 2 years away, eliminated that agreement and they could have eliminated Yanukovych, obviously, but through the ballot box. And could they have or was this agreement a situation that there was no democratic alternative to counteract because it would have been permanent?
Let me just say that what Yanukovych did was he said no to the Russian Eurasian Customs Union. He said no to that, right? He said yes to the European Association Agreement, though pending revision, because he said this is radically not in our interest. We're not going to sign in Vilnius. We won't sign that. And he also said that the European incentive package was completely inadequate, of $800 million, contingent on renewed IMF lending, which he didn't want to do.
Well, whatever agreement that he signed with Russia, could the people of Ukraine have elected a parliament that would have eliminated that 2 years down the road?
I think so, because the agreement that Putin was offering him at that time was, again, Yanukovych rejected the Russian deal of entering the Eurasian Customs Union, so there was no treaty kind of arrangement like that. What Putin was offering was a financing deal, saying $20 billion coming to you and a cut in gas prices. That was a simple deal, and that could have been reversed or not.
Well, that's first of all, we hope that the violence that now plagues Ukraine, that there is not only a ceasefire, but there's a cessation. That people with this airline catastrophe, where you had so many innocent people lost their lives just from a commercial airline. Let's hope that this jars people to the point that they sit down and take nonviolent options seriously and negotiations seriously with each other. That's not the case if Mr. Brzezinski is correct, that this is basically a outside motivated violent episode, and it's not just erupting from the inside. I happen to think that this started when Yanukovych was overthrown with violence, and that's the point it started. Whether or not that means that now outsiders have taken over the situation, and that Ukrainians themselves are not going to be able to do this, come to an understanding. I hope that we play a positive role in bringing that together, and I would hope that if Russia is indeed fanning the flames rather than trying to just react to other violence that's going on, I would hope that the Russian government sees a way to start bringing peace to Ukraine as well. I'd hope that we would submit that to them and their conscience, and turn a spotlight on it in the world. So I now yield to my ranking member, Mr. Hughes.